Hey everybody, thank you guys so much for coming. It's a beautiful day out, but I'm really glad you guys are inside here with me. Out of the sun, though, we're gonna talk about saving that sun and the climate, energy, food, and everything we can do to help make the world a better place through business, not just charity. So to give a quick intro, I'm Josh Constine. I'm the editor-at-large for TechCrunch. I've been there for 5.5 years, studying startups, innovative investing, sustainability, social impact, and early-stage financing. And before that, I was at Stanford, where I designed a master's program studying how humans interact over the internet. And I'm really excited about this panel because seeing in Silicon Valley, we're seeing more and more of these high net worth individuals who are coming out of these highly successful unicorn companies wanting to do something to put back into the economy, but also in a way that's sustainable. And a lot of them, they don't want to just give to charity. They want to see something that becomes sustainable over time and runs itself after some startup capital. And that's why I think innovative and sustainable businesses are doing really, really well right now. So I would love to introduce our panelists and let each of you guys tell us a little bit about what business you've done in the space and what you'll be able to tell us about.
Hey, my name is Seth Matlins. I head up the Branded Impact Group at WME, IMG, William Morris Endeavor, IMG.
A little louder.
A little louder. The Branded Impact Group is 4 months old. Our job is to focus on connecting the world's biggest brands to the cultural good as a way of making the world a better place. And we believe very much in the harmony between profit and purpose. My background is I'm a lifelong marketer. I've always been a cause marketer and have done a lot of work in the activist space, specifically around women's and girls' issues.
Great, thanks.
I'm Amber Valetta. I'm an actress, an activist, and I've been in fashion as a model for over 27 years. And my kind of mission and purpose is to try to help my industry and the fashion industry to become more sustainable. And not just on an environmental level, but on a human scale. And so I started an online store called Master and Muse. It was in partnership with Ukes.com, and we sold sustainable, responsibly made products from all over the world, primarily fashion and accessories for women. And now we're kind of in a new phase and looking at doing some other projects, and we're currently gonna produce a short to get the message out on a much fun and sexier level to engage the consumer on why they should care about fashion or textiles and how there are solutions. We just need to invest more, which we can talk about, and start creating more fashions that are sustainable.
Great, thanks.
Very good. Hi, I'm Drew Fitzgerald. I'm one of the co-founders of this company, which it set out to reduce the amount of fossil fuel in consumer packaged goods, but also establish a new and ethical way that the things that go inside the more sustainable packaging are acquired. So the entire value chain of how a product is manufactured and gets to market, that was something that Just set out to do. Simultaneously, the network that's behind Just is very committed to energy, food, and water issues today, current innovations that are in the market, but also some of the, I'd say, progressive ways that early stage clean tech entrepreneurs and innovations can get to market. And that's a very sort of wild west for people that have dynamite world-changing ideas. It's not a shoo-in that they're gonna see the light of day. So myself and a band of people that are committed to galvanizing what we'd call exotic capital, that's capital with a heart, so to speak, or concessionary capital, how that can find its way to the brilliant, young, bright minds that are creating the next innovations that are going to rid our atmosphere of tens of gigatons of CO2 annually. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
Awesome, thanks. I think if you guys speak a little closer to the mic, it'll probably be a little easier for you guys to hear out there. Yes. Great.
Okay. Great. And speaking of brilliant minds, I've had the opportunity, I'm a professor at the University of Southern California in the Marshall School of Business. I have a number of my students in the class, yeah. So I'm also the research director for the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab, and we are really looking at how do we solve some of the world's most pressing problems, both on the social side and the environmental side, but also taking a very blended value approach of how we look at impact and how we measure it and communicate it, and essentially how we also sell it too. Sell it to investors, sell it to teams, sell it to donors, kind of across the board, and how we benefit society. Our program, our Masters of Social Entrepreneurship, as a research director, I also teach in the program. It is one of the only and first programs with a master's solely focused. I came from NYU Stern, where it was embedded within the MBA program, and we grew that program on the environmental side as a top 10 MBA program. But it's a pleasure to be here and to share our thoughts.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Rob Sadow. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Scoop. Scoop is a community and a fully automated carpooling solution for commuters. And we partner with enterprises and office parks and cities to make it possible for coworkers and neighbors to share trips back and forth to work. So we're based in the Bay Area. We just expanded to Seattle recently, and as of this month, we pull about 1 million miles of driving off the road for commuter travel each month.
Great. So to preface this panel and give you guys a little bit of context about just how big of a deal this idea of sustainable business is, the survey by Deloitte says that 47% of millennials now say that the purpose of a business is to improve society and protect the environment. While that might not be conveyed in the way that our stock and our public markets work, it's obviously something that consumers really care about. Purpose-driven companies have been shown to outperform the market over 10-to-1 over a 15-year period, and they have 3.7 times more Twitter followers. So people really care about this, and in the end, that consumer interest is leading to better business. And in terms of where the talent is going, talent wants to move towards sustainable ideas as well. Back in 2002, just 15% of MBA students that were polled said that making a contribution to society was a big, important part of their career. By 2007, that had gone from 15% to 26%. Now in 2014, 83% of MBA students say that that's important, that for them, they need their job to make an environmental or social difference in the world. So the best talent in the world is going to these companies, and that's why I think there's such an opportunity right now. Now, I would love to hear some of the human stories about how you guys, Amber, Drew, Rob, how you guys were able to get these businesses off the ground, both in terms of how you were able to sell your story to investors and financiers, but also to consumers, and how you were able to convince people that this was a better alternative, not just because of the way that the product works, but also in the way that it makes them feel.
Well, that's a good question. We could have created a Just Water last year and had it to market by now if we followed the traditional way, Nestle or Evian or sorry, I used to work for Evian, Dasani or Coke or something. If we followed the traditional way things were done, the business as usual approach, we would have had this thing in market within, 18 months. We started working on this thing 7 years ago, right? So much so that the company that is the original manufacturer of this package said, we will never do water in this package. That was about 4 years ago. And we wore them down, and we appealed to their sense of environmental stewardship and presenting the problem in the market over and over and over again until they finally came along with us. It was a lot of work. I had less gray hairs, and the ability for us to set out for something that we wanted to undo the way the current status quo of doing business was done was so much work, but there was there wasn't anyone in the company that was saying, no, don't do that, take a shortcut. And we were very lucky, and you probably experienced this with you being in a startup right now, is that if you get the right cultural mix of people that are all moving, they're navigating in the right direction, you start to not only weather the obstacles and the time frame that it takes to get something like this to market, but you end up coming up with newer ideas as well, which is when we had set out to do water, we were originally, we didn't really know about how the water model would work, but by the time all these people got into a room, we ended up doing something that was monumentally different, which is this is the first time a bottled water company has ever partnered with a municipality. And the municipality, like many towns, like many municipalities, struggles with, snow removal, police, infrastructure repairs, pensions for city workers, et cetera. And towns that are having a hard time bringing business into them, this is a big problem. They need state aid and state relief. And so this was not on the blueprint when we first started 7 years ago. By the time we got this thing to market, we had met with the town and said, you have a lot of financial stress, but you have one thing that if we jointly commercialize it in an ethical way, we can drive brand new source of revenue into your town. And the only thing we ask is that half that money is geared towards infrastructure repairs for water. So that's like unheard of if you're Nestle. The Nestle people are like, that's ridiculous. You're supposed to pay as little and take as much as you want, which works if you have an infinite amount of something, but it doesn't work, as many of us know in the room, that we have water scarcity issues, both abroad and domestically.
That's great. So you're saying that you partnered with a municipality and were able to get them to help you with the resources necessary to get this off the ground. How did you guys strike those deals? Like, how did you find that town, and how did you make that negotiation work out?
That was a long, long journey. We went to several different states. Some people were like, you're crazy. What are you doing? Get out of this town. And some places were places that, there were places in western Pennsylvania that so needed a leg up. They would look like the set of a Frontline special for the falling of Main Street. There were places where we were like, we could do so much good here, but their water quality was so bad that we would have to truck the water in from Pennsylvania, or from Ohio. And so we were sadly met with a really good social story, but not a great environmental story. And that we could have said, well, we'll just go with that. But everyone, when you get that cohort in a startup together that says, we want to do this in this way, and we're not going to be unwielding about it, it took a longer time, and we finally found the right town and convinced them.
That's great. So that seems like a big insight from that. It was that even though it seemed like an unlikely model, at first, because it was an unlikely model, you might have assumed that the first municipality that turned you down, that they would all turn you down.
Yes.
But I think it really takes that stick-to-itiveness to get through these kind of problems. When you're talking about an innovative idea that people do want in their hearts to get behind, but there may be a lot of red tape in the way. So Amber, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what was that crux of getting you guys into the market and making sure that both financiers and consumers really got behind your products?
Well, I started this idea of Master and Muse, which was the online store, about probably 6 years ago. I'm looking at my partner. Somewhere around there, and it was really just a very big idea, and then we kept boiling it down and boiling it down. And we at first thought we were going to just build a brand and create product of our own. And then I had one of those aha moments, which was, I'm talking about doing something sustainable and talking about the environment and looking also at labor issues. How can I just go start building product when I know very little about the industry on that level, like on this side of it? And having never been a buyer and all of those things. And so I just felt like I couldn't put more out there without understanding the business better. And so we decided instead to become curators and to find those small brands that were creating fashion and accessories that were either made in a sustainable way or responsible. So they could be making something that maybe wasn't out of a sustainable material, but they were in a women's co-op and they were giving back to their community. And so that's how we kind of vetted our vendors. And we decided to partner rather than to go and take capital. And I met with a lot of investors and a lot of people at the time. This, again, was 6 or 7 years ago. When we were talking about this idea, triple bottom line, and creating a business that had value and purpose, people did not know they just didn't get it. They didn't get it. They thought I was, they didn't understand. They thought maybe a celebrity just had a great idea, a fun idea, and was going to lose interest. It was a lot of just misconception. And also, the green, economy hadn't really kicked up. It's like it was still, people were talking, but a lot wasn't happening. I mean, I wasn't speaking on that many panels. And so we decided that finding someone, rather than taking someone's money and trying to do something and be falling short, we would go and try and find a partner who had the capabilities of the heavy lifting, who was going to invest in the business of getting the merchandise out there. So we partnered with Ukes.com, and they're from Europe, and they're now Net-a-Porter, Ukes.com, it's all together. And they had a little tiny subsection of their site that was for green, projects. And, first when they wanted to just do a t-shirt, and we were like, no, we want a business. We want a creative. We want to create a feeling and an experience. And, they finally came around, and they were a great partner. They invested, they carried the inventory. They gave the dollars for the creative that we shot twice a year. A lot of favors were called in to my fashion friends, and we got to bring these young designers and small designers to the marketplace who would have never gotten any sort of visual or high fashion like exposure. And also, just the sheer fact that they were getting photographed, things like that, they wouldn't have gotten before. So we decided that was the best way to partner with a bigger, stronger entity that also believed in this and collaborate. And we really believe in collaboration, and that's kind of been the forefront of my business model, is collaborating.
That's awesome. So both on the, looking downwards towards your guys' vendors, you were able to find a bunch of people who were already doing things in the sustainable space, but help to aggregate them so that they could create the unified front and brand to be able to reach a wider audience. And then on the other side, taking, being able to find a partner where you don't have to sell your soul, but you can get that kind of distribution. So you can take something that, it's, we say in the tech industry, it's like, oh, it's great that you invented something, but who brought it to a billion people? That's what really matters, is getting to that scale. And sometimes you need those big partners. And I think you guys have done an incredible job of finding a partner that works with you and understands your ethos, but still has that kind of reach. So Rob, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your guys' story, about what was the moment that really, that things really came together in terms of both in the finance and what was powering the business, and also with consumers, and what's led to how you said now 1 million miles of driving has been taken off the road because of your business. You could tell us a little bit how that happened.
Sure. So, it's interesting as I listen to the stories. It's incredibly similar to what we experienced at Scoop, which is, at the very beginning, most important to us was, are we solving a real problem? Do people really experience an issue with how they get back and forth to work, and the impact that they have getting back and forth to work? And then can you convince other people, be it enterprises or investors or team members, to come around to your viewpoint on how the world works and how the world could be? And that's where you spend most of your energy in the early days. And so a lot of what we did for the first 6 or 9 months, and I started the company with my brother in 2014, was just testing and research and understanding how people experience their commute. Why was it that they drove alone? What would make them change their perspective? And then try to figure out how to package that into something that people would actually use and actually feel like they could take value from. So first and foremost for us was, how do you build a business that really solves a true need, that actually is solving a problem, not just building a business? And then how do you attract the right folks around the table that share your worldview, that want to partner to build the same thing that you aspire to accomplish, and do it in a way that, to your point, you don't have to sell your soul, that you feel like you're accomplishing your vision, that people around the table agree with you.
Yeah, it sounds like what you guys did was, instead of just starting something that you said was going to help the environment or reduce emissions, you looked for a real need in the market. And I definitely see a lot of pitfalls in that, both in sustainable businesses, but also in normal for-profit startups, where the founders have some idea of what they want to have happen, but instead of creating a hypothesis and testing it out, they just jump right to the conclusion. And I think starting with what do people really need that's going to make their lives better, and then how can you do that sustainably, is a lot better than, and ends up working a lot better than saying like, oh, we want to do something that's good, but then we have to find the right need. It becomes a lot more complicated, and that's one of the big pitfalls. So, and that's how I want to segue into the next segment, is asking Seth and Jill. You guys are kind of the academics. Jill, literally an academic, and you've seen so many businesses go through this. What are some of the pitfalls that you can recommend to everyone from the innovators and entrepreneurs in this space, but also the people backing these businesses? What are the pitfalls that they can look to avoid when doing these kind of sustainable businesses?
Yeah, great. I think a lot of this, there's a lot of trends here going on. In terms of, for entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, environmental, on the side of really that product and market fit, right? And the idea of going out and being so enamored with your idea, and being so enamored that we want to get this to market as fast as we can. and really not understanding, again, going back, understanding the needs of the community, understanding the needs of possible partners, how we can build collective social and environmental impact. And I think we tend not to. We have so many early stage social entrepreneurs who come into our program with a crisp idea that they feel, a concise idea that they feel that they want to definitely take to market. And it's not until you go through and we go through an exercise of really testing out the assumptions, listening to the community, listening to what is already being provided out there, and how can then we add value to what is traditionally already been done. And there's so much in terms of the work that when they go out and test the assumptions, getting out of the building, really understanding and listening, gaining insights, that is where when they really start to get that idea in terms of where they can go next and where they can bring it to market. But also then look in terms of on the investor space, they go through a number of boot camps and clinics. We've raised over millions of dollars for social entrepreneurs, bringing them all the way through, a couple years in through idea all the way to conception. And really going out and really pounding the pavement and understanding what everybody, all the stakeholders that they're involved in, what it's all about. But that product market fit, sometimes it's just the mismatch is just, it's not there in the beginning until it does take some time until they actually come with something that is relevant.
Yeah, you gotta avoid drinking the Kool-Aid. I think in this business, the whole space of sustainable innovation and sustainability is rife with people whose hearts are in the right place, but haven't necessarily qualified their ideas as well. And I've definitely seen businesses go down that route with, they're sure they know what they want, but they haven't actually gotten out in the street and asked 100 people, is this something that's not, like, the big problem is you ask these people and you say, is this something you want? And they're like, yeah, I would use that. That's actually a no. What you really need is them to be like, give me that product. Like, when is that out? How much can I pay for it? If you don't have a product that's like that, that's getting that kind of response, you need to go back to the drawing board and go back out of the building and re-qualify your ideas. So Seth, maybe you've seen some people who've gone through some other pitfalls.
I'm not sure I entirely agree with the depth of I must have that as a prerequisite. It's a beautiful to have. I'm not sure it's a need to have.
Why?
Because, and I keep hearing in my head that classic Henry Ford quote, right? If I asked people what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster horse. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we have within the context of this conversation. And I didn't mean to make this about horses, but we got to lead the horse to water. No pun intended. And I'll give you a story that is a pitfall. In 2010, I started a double bottom line business called Feel More Better. I'm assuming nobody's heard of it because the only bottom line it hit was mine. And it was intended to make the world a better place for women and girls. I was just developing the idea. It was all about the sharing of story, right? Because I believe that we are all in the storytelling business. We are all in the narrative business. I may come from Hollywood, but I think we're all in that business, whether we're telling and selling a story to an investor or an end user or an employee or a prospective employee. And I was figuring out what the business might be, and at its core, I realized it was about giving women a vehicle for expressing their truest selves, free of judgment, free of anything except that expression. And at that time, I read an article about a company I had just heard of. It was called Pinterest. And it was probably not everybody in this room had heard of it at that point. So I said, these guys, they're in the self-expression business too. Hadn't launched, so I find Ben Silberman's email. I send him a note. I was like, hey man, I'm starting something in self-expression, skewing towards women. You've got that. Maybe there are things we could do together. He sends me a note back, and he says, thank you so much, but I think we're gonna focus. I look at that story and I think two things. One, it was very nice of him to reply. And two, focus. And we can get so enamored with success, so enamored with traction that we can lose focus. And Ben's lesson to me, which I did not realize until after I closed the business, was one of focus. And that goes back to what you were saying about product market fit, but allowing that focus and that fit to evolve and to develop as more insight comes in.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's not necessarily about not having that need or building something that has that need, but saying that if what you're doing isn't working, having the focus and flexibility to put the time in necessary to pivot it into something that does work. And that can be really daunting. I've talked to some businesses lately, they were just terrified. It was such a big change, and they were sure it was going to ruin them, but it was only because they were willing to say, we're going to have to go back into the office for a year before we're going to be able to get this out. But this is the only way to go forward. And it's going to take a lot of focus. There's not going to be some magic bullet. We're just going to have to put our heads down. And I think that is a really important part of it. So looking forward, what are some of the big areas of opportunity that you guys see for sustainable innovation right now? What are some areas that you think are really panning out quickly at this point? So if there's people, whether they're entrepreneurs in the room or financiers, that they can get behind.
Well, coming from fashion specifically and textiles, it's a very untapped market when you're talking about sustainability. And so there's a huge amount of areas to put in cash and to create value, because you've got everything from raw materials all the way to end of life of a garment or a textile. And so there's investment possibilities from there all the way to the other side. And if we start thinking about building all products in a circular fashion where things become bionutrients, then the possibilities are endless. So a piece of clothing or textile could actually become a bionutrient for something else. And so there's businesses from you could be breaking down and separating fabrics. You could be in the science sector, creating the microbes that are breaking down the polyester blends. You could be a fashion designer, creating great fashions that are accessible to everybody that are made sustainably. You could be a farmer, not using GMOs and using organic cotton or not pesticides. So there's endless amounts of opportunities and innovation within the fashion industry for investors. And one of the things I was going to say to add on to leading the horse to water is that a lot of times people don't know there's an issue. So we have to put it forward to them to bring awareness, and that's part of our jobs as people who are passionate about these different areas, is that most people don't know that there's an issue in the fashion and textile industry, and we have an opportunity to really make a difference and culturally make a huge shift.
What about you guys? Any areas? One area that I'm really interested in, you talked a lot about water, is like desalination and hard technologies. We talked a lot about consumer-focused brands, but it really depends on what kind of risk profile you're looking for. There's a lot of ways that you can start making an impact more quickly, and you can be sure you're going to make some impact, but it's sort of a question of scale. And then there's other businesses, which are really on the hard tech side, everything from nuclear energy and desalination techniques that, if they pan out, if you fund something that ends up working, it could have a massive impact on the whole world, but it's like a real startup. It's very risky. It's not like a medium-sized business. So maybe there's some of those areas that you guys could shed light on.
Yeah, there are big, hairy problems in the world that need science and nature are the only bedfellows that can pull us out of the challenges that we're in the headwinds about. And there are bright, brilliant minds out there that are taking the long arc path of creating not software solutions, partially software, but creating hardware and deployable engineering solutions that are unfathomable to really understand in this day and age. Things that make current solar panels look like 8-track tapes, and next-gen nuclear, and carbon sequestration that could turn them into viable chemicals, and little blankets that go at the base of fume stacks of electrical generation plants that can reduce the utility draw by 20%. There are a million of these, maybe not a million, but there are a lot of these technologies, and for so long, there's a reason you haven't heard about them. For the past, 30 years, unless the government stepped in or unless risk-based capital stepped in, which was very rare, these technologies died. They died on the vine. There's a reason our solar industry did not jumpstart a lot earlier. There was no cash to generate it, and it's a very complex market as well. But what's happening now, what's a new sense of optimism, I think is two things. One is entrepreneurial literacy. And that's something that, you know, when a lot of the people in the room here grew up, the heroes were sports figures, heads of states. Well, there's a new cast of heroes, and they're Dorseys and Zuckerbergs and Gateses and people that are startups. And some of our favorite apps and some of our favorite things were startups. And we follow their trajectory from MySpace to YouTube to, you know, Blogger to any of these things. We follow these trajectories, you know how they work. And even from an entertainment side, if anyone watches Silicon Valley, that's a 101 freshman course in startup. Right? There's a terminology and a language in that show. It's funny as hell, but I've had startups, and I wish I had watched Silicon Valley before I had done my startup in 1999. I swear to God. And which goes back to the initial part about market and solution to market, is I created a startup that was a solution in search of a problem. And the problem wasn't there. And I walked around and people were like, nice work, kid. That's amazing. We don't need it. And I got that a lot. And so I didn't have that entrepreneurship literacy. Now when we start looking at using the energies of everyone in this room to start looking and some of the social responsibility investing dialogue that was happening in the earlier panels is that there is optimism for these big, long time horizon technologies. You know, hopefully some of those technologies are the ones we're going to see in the Impact Challenge after that, but there are tons like the 6 or 7 we're going to see today. And that's because there are new forms of capital that are out there. No longer can we demonize venture capital for not getting involved with the next desalination technology or the next membrane or nano-sized thing that's going to help bring fresh drinking water to sub-Saharan Africa. It's not their job. VCs are not supposed to be demonized for this. And governments are not great company runners. They're good for jump-starting some innovation in little departments, but as we've seen recently, at least since November, we're having a fluctuation in the Department of Energy, fluctuation in the Department of Interior, fluctuation in the EPA, and the CDC, places that are bastions of science and exploration. So we are once again looking at the free markets to be able to kind of do this. So the term I used before about concessionary capital, there are people out there with large billions and access to money that just don't know how to pick winners, right? And there are people out there that can pick winners and can't identify these large pools of capital. So we're thankfully starting to see places that are progressive institutions like USC, Stanford, Caltech, MIT, to a certain extent Harvard. That was a jab at Harvard. About starting to do what is teaching innovation about and how to pool capital with these life-saving technologies. Technologies that are going to save and preserve the livelihoods of all your children. You know, we have some big, honest-to-goodness problems that are out there, and it's going to get solved by entrepreneurs. And if anyone is interested in the work that I'm doing in terms of matching exotic capital with early-stage clean tech that is dire and life-saving, come and see me. So.
Josh, I have a slightly different perspective, I think, on the question you asked in terms of what sectors are interesting. You know, one of the things that's interesting if you listen to Amber, for example, speak is that there's such passion around the business that you started or the problem that you're trying to solve, right? And one of, I think, the most dangerous things for entrepreneurs is to go search for problems or to go search for sectors where you think there's actually interesting opportunity. If you look at who most successful entrepreneurs are, they generally have some deep personal or professional experience in what they're talking about or what they're working on, and have spent a lot of energy learning that area because they have passion about that area. And so, in my mind, the best businesses that are going to have the biggest impact from a sustainability perspective are going to be the ones from people that experience this on a day-to-day basis or have seen this in their life in some kind of real acute way and therefore feel like it's worth spending their energy to do it versus saying, oh, I think this sector is interesting or this industry is ripe for a more sustainable solution for how to do something.
Yeah, I mean, having a superhero origin story really helps, having some reason why you are the person to pick. Because honestly, when I talk to VCs, the thing that they care most about is not necessarily the product or the business in its current instance, but really if that team member is going to be able to work towards getting to their goal no matter how they have to get there. And you know, some of the best entrepreneurs I know have had those superhero origin stories. I mean, if you look at Jack Dorsey starting Square, he talked about how his dad used to run a pizza shop and he was getting raked over by the credit card companies He was like, people aren't buying $2,000 refrigerators. I can't pay this high flat fee. I should be paying a tiny percentage of this fee. So it's the same percentage as these big companies are. And then now we have Square, where the businesses can pay essentially a flat percentage. Or I know another company called Airware, which makes auto guidance systems and autonomous drone cloud software that basically helps enterprises run drones. His parents, his mom and dad met because his dad was giving his mom flying lessons. The kid literally grew up in planes his whole life. It wasn't like, oh, I hear drones are a big thing, I should get into that. It was like, I have been flying RC copters since I was 4 years old. I am the person to build this. And so I think looking for a business that you can get into, even if you don't have expertise in it, can, like you said, be very dangerous. But at the same time, if there's something that you're really passionate about and you have the ability to build a business in that space, but maybe don't have the knowledge, that's a great opportunity to go find a co-founder who is in that position, who does have that superhero origin story. So I want to talk a little bit about getting these businesses to scale, how you actually popularize them. I want to see what kind of tactics have you guys found have been actually very efficient for getting there. Whether that's grassroots campaigns versus like a big flashy media launch, or is it raising money to be able to buy ads, or are you trying to do cheap viral stunts? Are you going with smaller influencers versus big celebrities? What have you guys found that's worked well to get these sustainable businesses to massive reach?
There's no one answer. If there were, there would be a template that we'd all follow. And
there was one wrong answer, I would tell you were wrong. So I'm glad that you're not saying there is one.
Yeah.
But maybe you can say which businesses would fit better with which models, or things that you certainly think aren't working as well as people expect.
I think certainly at the startup stage, the notion of the big splashy event that captures attention for a moment as a vehicle for launching something has probably proven to work less than more. Attention in today's marketplace is, perhaps our greatest currency. It is fleeting, and if I capture it for a moment, but I cannot satisfy it with the right product, well, as has been said decades ago by a legend in the ad business, the fastest way to kill a bad product is with good advertising. And so I think I'm just full of cliche today, so apologies for that, but I do think that there is something to slow and steady wins the race. However, I think it's as slow as necessary and as fast as possible, because capital is in oftentimes as short a supply as attention, and you've got to make sure that you're working it.
What about you, Amber?
I think there's a few different things. So I think one, collaboration is key. So if you're a small business or a young entrepreneur like I am or was really, collaborating with a larger entity is always good, or even collaborating with another entrepreneur or small business. Also, I think knowing your brand and what you stand for authentically and your values, because that really determines how you're going to come out of the gate. I mean, if that's not really your ethos to be big and splashy, then just doing that to get yourself out there doesn't necessarily match who you are. So I think authenticity is really important. And then lastly, valued influencers. Finding people out there in the world that can be valued influencers to your brand or your company, and can add a deeper meaning to the story that you're trying to tell. So, I've recently been partnering with different companies who want to tell the story about sustainability or how they're trying to be more green, but they can't really tell it themselves. And so they need someone like me, or they need, anybody, could even be another business person. They need someone else to be their voice, and that people believe and understand and know that they're walking the walk. And so I think today's market really can be useful by using somebody like a valued influencer as well.
If I could just add to that, I think in agreeing completely with everything Amber said, I think in addition to brand values, which have been driving businesses for decades, what we're seeing today and it has accelerated rapidly in the last 100 days, is the import of cultural values. And increasingly, and Josh, you said this in your introduction, we're voting with our wallets. And increasingly, we are choosing who to buy from and where to work based on what that company is doing to make the world a better place. And for the sustainable business, to put sustainability in quotes because it encompasses a lot, that's a magnificent thing. That's a magnificent opportunity that will hasten the path to scale, because cultural values and a perspective on what the world can be and should look like are baked in from the beginning.
Yeah, I really like your point, Amber, about collaboration. We found in Silicon Valley that single founders by themselves have a much higher failure rate, because the fact is that there's nobody there in those hard times to tell you, keep going, we got this, I'm there for you. That goes so far, and it's so scary, because every entrepreneur is going to go through those moments, and if there's nobody there holding you accountable, keeping you on the track, it can go off the rails really quickly. There's nobody there to say, like, oh, why didn't you come into work today? If you're by yourself, that's why I'm always a little bit worried about single founder companies. So whether you're collaborating with a big partnership and a big other company, or just finding one other person who really believes in your idea, that goes so far to getting things done.
Yeah, and I also think in terms of going off of accountability is the whole idea of transparency. And transparency in terms of everything that you're doing, in terms of if you're developing a product or a service across the entire value chain of where you add value, who is your suppliers, what are they doing, how are they acting responsibly, who are their end users, how are they using the product, and how are they then disposing of the product too as well. So I think that's a key, really a key feature of, and also communicating in terms of using your consumers and using those that the early adopters in terms of gaining traction, but only listening to them to develop. Pinterest was an NYU startup. They started as Tote, and a number of years ago that we funded. But they went directly into the market where all we want to do is it's women's handbags. And what they found was that women were very interested. They wanted to share. They wanted to show their friends, their family. And the whole idea of just sharing, again, the sharing economy, kind of the early onset of that was really kind of the beginning of, hey, we want to share other things. And the whole idea of sharing movies, sharing books, what have you, kind of gained off of that. But it was a huge pivot, but it was also something, based off of a belief and a value of what people wanted to do and how they wanted to behave.
To build off something that both Jill and Amber said, you were talking about authenticity, you were talking about transparency. You're going to hear a lot of terms now and into the future about it's all about storytelling. It's all about storytelling. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all about filmmaking, right? That's what people think. Oh man, how am I going to tell this story? Where am I going to? The technical art of telling storytelling is one thing, but when you talk about when Jade and I started this company, we didn't rush into the market. We wanted to create as much truth and authenticity across this brand, and we would eventually understand it's like an onion. There's so much deep sauce in this particular brand, and right up to us buying a church from the Salvation Army, and that's where we created our factory. And that's a very complex and long. It's more than an elevator pitch to talk about. But I remember I was in a checkout line at a store one time, and there was a lady in front of me buying Just Water. It was kind of a slow day, and the lady who was checking them out said, "Oh, this is my favorite water." And the lady who was in front of me, not knowing I had any affiliation, started spitting out all this story. She's like, they bought a church, and she started going. I was like, "I love you," I was like, "I love you." And so the thing is, the idea of storytelling is that as we keep going into the marketing, there's no place for lies to hide. Maybe on Capitol Hill, but there's sunlight is the disinfectant of all things. And when you're starting to set out there and build a company, like Jack Dorsey's parents owning a pizza thing, work and make sure that you are building as much story and you're building it for the right ideas, because that's the gas in your tank that's going to propel you more. That's how you decide what business you're going to go into. It's how you decide that whether people are going to like you and whether people are going to respect you and whether people are going to be your storytellers and evangelists, and do something that, when you really, really love something, you learn to reinterpret it. And when you reinterpret it, that's how you add the next generation of innovation, storytelling, entrepreneurship, and hopefully benefit for the earth.
when you're talking about that authenticity, that has to run through every part of your business. It can't just be in the product that you sell. It has to be in the way that you treat your employees, the way that you would treat your vendors. And we've just had this sort of flame-up story about a company called Thinx, which was designed to be a period panty line, which was designed for women during that period. But they weren't paying their women, they were not promoting their women, they were not giving good maternity leave, and they were not embodying those ideals with their own company, and that led everything to kind of implode for them. And now we're seeing a really interesting case study with this between Uber and Lyft. You know, people are voting with their dollars, and they're saying, you know, maybe it's with their phones now, it's not cash, but they're voting with their PayPal because they're going with Lyft, and you're seeing, you know, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people deleting Uber because they just don't believe in the ideals and the values of the company. And, you know, Rob, I know you have a really interesting opinion on that because you've seen that from up close in the carpooling space. Maybe you could talk about like how that authenticity plays out.
It's really interesting to watch. You know, it's as a small company, and I started Scoop with my brother and two of us in a basement, right? And now we have about 30 employees, so certainly not of Uber and Lyft size, right? But you go through the process of what does it mean to build a team and think about what you stand for and what is your culture and how do you want to communicate that externally. And if you make the wrong hires or you don't have the right culture internally, you can't be disconnected in your external presence from the way it actually feels internally at your company. If it is, and you're trying to put on one face outside, but it feels differently internally, that will come out at some point in time. And one of the interesting things I think that we see in the marketplace is if you're not authentic in that way, or people don't believe that what you say and what your employees embody and your values actually manifest in your product and the way you do business, you get very short rope. You know, people don't really have a lot of patience with you as a company. They will walk away from you in a hurry. And so it's been interesting to watch that play out in the market, and it's something that we take very seriously, both in every decision that we make on who to hire and do they reflect our values and what we're trying to build as a company, the way that we communicate externally, and the way that we think about even the feel and experience of our product on a day-to-day basis.
Great. So to go over some of the things that we've talked about today, I think some of the awesome insights that we've gotten from our panelists, you know, the biggest key is that when you're working in sustainable innovation, because it's not just a purely for-profit business, you are going to encounter some resistance, and it's going to be critical for you to stick to it no matter what. Partnerships can be really helpful to get through those tough spots, whether that's partnering with municipalities who can give you resources, aggregating other players in the space and turning them into a unified brand like you guys have done, Amber, or partnering for reach with a larger organization. And, you know, but no matter what, you need to first make sure you have a need that you're addressing. You can't just go out saying we want to work on this cause without having a product that people actually need. You can't drink the Kool-Aid just because it's a beautiful thing to try to help the world. But there are endless possibilities, and if you go out there, whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor, there are places that you're going to be able to find something that you love, and if you partner with the right co-founders or the right other investors, you're going to be able to make this happen. And it really comes down to what risk profile you want. Do you want to solve a really big, hairy idea with a hard science problem behind it, or do you want to make a consumer brand that starts to have immediate visceral impact and is going to do some good no matter what? And I think there's room for both of those. You know, looking forward, there's huge opportunities around, especially around climate, food, energy, whether that's in desalination, climate fixes, nuclear energy, but still, you just can't go and find a space that you know nothing about. Make sure you have somebody who's been living and breathing it. And when it comes to popularizing those businesses, you know, flashy media launches, we've seen time and time again, do not end up working out. You really need to have that kind of grassroots, slow burn approach to gaining support, whether that's building your company or building your partnerships or building your consumer base. And, you know, I love the phrase that you use, Seth, to say that you need to go as slow as necessary but as fast as possible. And that can mean collaborating, and that means getting influencers who can tell your story even better than you can on board without necessarily losing your message to somebody else. But really, when it comes down to it, it's all going to be about the transparency across the entire business chain. Consumers are smart. They are investigating now. These people who are voting with their dollars, these, you know, sustainable buyers, they're going to look into your business. They're going to find out what's really going on. So you need to live your mission through your product, through your story, through your company culture. So thank you guys all for coming. Thank you to the panelists for talking to us.